Hi everyone, welcome to English with Miss Singh. Going forward with our revision series, today I will take you through another one of Robert Frost's famous poem titled Fire and Ice. Just like Dust of Snow, this is a very short yet powerful poem. This poem is largely about unchecked human emotions and how such emotions can be extremely destructive. So let's begin. The poem discusses two ways the world might end, by fire or ice. Now the poet uses fire and ice as metaphors to compare negative human emotions. Fire represents heat and therefore wild emotions like desire or passion. If these emotions go out of control, then they can be very destructive for everyone. Likewise, ice represents cold and therefore icy emotions like hatred or indifference or intolerance. Just how out of control anger and greed can be destructive, out of control hatred, insensitivity or tolerance can be equally dangerous. So we need to remember fire symbolizes desire, lust, anger and passion that can destroy the world, basically all fiery emotions. And ice symbolizes hatred, cruelty and indifference, which can also be destructive. Further in the poem, the poet expresses his opinion on the two forces, saying he has tasted desire and believes it can cause harm. Now by tasted, the poet means that he has experienced. So when he says he has experienced, he could have been the one to have those emotions, or he could have been the one to receive those emotions. So either way, we understand that he has experienced fiery emotions. Further, the poet says if there was a chance for the world to end twice, which is not only shocking but also unimaginable, ice would be enough to destroy the world. He further says that he knows enough about ice to make such a statement. So not only does he have experience with fire, he knows a lot about ice too. The poem is short but thought-provoking, showing that both emotions and human behavior can be powerful and destructive. Now, there is so much to consider in these few lines. Not only should you remember what emotions fire and ice represent, but you should also be able to relate it to the real world. And think of how these human emotions have changed the world in the past and how they can cause irreversible damage. Think about wars and what may have, caused them. You can connect that with human emotions. See if it is human emotions that were responsible for causing wars at different points of time in history. Also think about the environment and on the lines of climate change, etc. Is it our greed for more that is bringing us closer to the end of the world? Another thing that I would like to bring to your attention is the poet's choice of words. Like he's having a casual conversation about choosing a color for his walls and not talking about the end of the world or the destruction of the world. He uses phrases like ice is great and would suffice. So this shows his ironic and sarcastic tone about self-destructive nature of human beings, right? And that is the reason why he uses such a tone, to highlight how destructive human beings can be. Moving on, let's take a look at the theme of this poem. Uncontrolled human emotions can be destructive. Fire represents emotions like desire, passion, greed, and anger. Ice represents emotions like hatred, cruelty, and indifference. And both kinds of emotions can destroy the world. Now, before we move on to the questions, let's take a quick look at the literary devices. Symbolism, fire and ice are symbols of different human emotions. Then we have alliteration. This is the easiest one to spot. Wherever you see a repetition of the first sound, that is alliteration. Remember, the sound has to be consonant sound, not vowel sound. Then we have anaphora. If you do not know what sort of literary device this is, then just look for phrases repeated at the beginning of the lines. For example, the phrase some say, it's repeated in the first two lines, so that's anaphora. And the last one we have here is extended metaphor. which means one concept is compared throughout the poem. Okay, for example, in this, there is a direct comparison between human emotions and fire and ice, and that runs throughout the poem. That is extended metaphor. All right, let's go over this extract and the questions based on it. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Question number 1, what does the poet mean by perish twice? So by perish twice, he means if the world were to end twice, which of course is a hypothetical statement because it cannot happen in reality. By hypothetical, I mean imaginary. Because if you destroy something once, it cannot be destroyed again. Number 2, what human emotion is associated with ice in this extract? That's a very direct question. You can write hatred, indifference, intolerance, any of those. Number 3, why does the poet say that ice would suffice for destruction? That's because he thinks that not only fire but ice is equally capable of destroying the world. So icy emotions can also be very destructive. Number 4, the poet compares human emotions to forces of destruction. In today's world, how can ice be seen as destructive? Give a suitable example. Now, this question has two clear parts, so your answer should be in two parts as well. First of all, you need to have clarity on what sort of emotions fall under ice. So all emotions like hatred, indifference, tolerance, they fall under cold emotions. When people no longer care or feel any empathy for anyone. So you can relate this to discrimination on various bases that can be a cause for destruction. Your examples could also be intolerance for other people's religions. It could also be not raising your voice against bullying or injustice because you no longer care or because you just don't feel for them. Moving on, we have event-based questions. The first one is, what two possible events of destruction does the poet describe in the poem Fire and Ice? This is a very direct question. Destruction by fire and destruction by ice. Now, of course, if it is a 3-marker, you will go into the details of saying what does fire represent and what does ice represent, and then also quote examples from the poem if needed. If it is a 6-marker, then you have to be as detailed as possible, be very elaborate with your explanation, and include examples too. Number 2, describe how the poet presents the events of destruction through fire and ice in the poem. So he mentions that he has experienced fire and thus knows that the world is sure to end in fire, but we are also told somewhere in the later half of the poem that he knows enough about ice and is also certain that ice can be equally destructive. So he presents both of them as being equally destructive. Now we have theme-based questions. How does the poet use fire and ice as symbols in the poem? Now this question is only worded a little differently, but here too you have to write about fire and ice and what they represent. The details you need to write will depend on how many marks it carries. But again, if it is a 2-marker, don't be too detailed, just write what each one represents. If it is a 3-marker, write what each one represents, but also give examples. If it is a 6-marker, then you might be needed to give your own opinion and write about what's happening in the world right now and how that could be related to the poem. Number 2, discuss how the poem Fire and Ice presents a warning against extreme human emotions. So in this question, you can highlight poet's use of casual and sarcastic tone to show how human beings sometimes lack kindness and empathy. Now, he doesn't directly ask the readers to be kind and loving, but he highlights how uncontrolled emotions can bring an end to the whole world, and that is how he conveys that we need to be more humane, more sympathetic towards each other. And that is, in one way, a warning against human emotions, that we need to avoid all those the negative human emotions. Let's take a look at our first open-ended question. The poet believes that both fire and ice can destroy the world. Which one do you think is more dangerous in today's world? Give reason for your answer. Now, if you like, you can connect it to war and fiery emotions being responsible for causing wars. You can also write about coldness that people have towards the environment and how that can be damaging. So what you need to do for this answer is you have to pick one of the two things, ice or fire, and then give a solid reason to support your choice. That why do you think one is more dangerous than the other? Of course, this is no debate, but you definitely need to write something like the world will end because of people's indifference towards the environment. Before any other emotions have a chance to destroy the world, our inability to act or do anything for the environment is more likely to bring our end, right? So because we don't care about enough about the environment. So you can write something on these lines. Okay, so what I have picked is ice over fire, but you can do just the opposite. You can pick fire over ice. You could say that maybe it's war that will cause the destruction of the whole world before the climate gets us, right? All right, let's look at the second question. The poem suggests that destruction does not always come from physical forces. How is this idea relevant in modern society? Now here in this question again, you can write something similar to the previous one, but you can also bring in how people are becoming more and more intolerant of others. Um, so you can write things like you come from a certain religion or a different caste or a different or you are of a different color, and then there'll be a lot of people waiting to attack you, to pull you down, and things can blow up very soon in today's time. You can write about wars, of course. You can write about countries looking for reasons to fall out. So basically, it could be a social issue, it could be global, political, or even an environmental issue that you can write about in this answer. Here's a last set of questions, literary devices related questions. Discuss how Robert Frost uses literary devices to convey the central theme of Fire and Ice. So in a question like this, depending on how many marks it carries, you will frame your answer. Answer briefly if it is a 3-marker, mentioning 2 literary devices. Give examples like where symbolism has been used, or what is the extended metaphor, or where there's alliteration, or where there's anaphora, right? So just pick examples from the poem and write what the devices are and how you connect them to the meaning of the poem. If it is a 6-marker, then you will go into much more detail and you will write how and why the poet has chosen a specific poetic device and how does that help with the meaning, right? So it has to be way more detailed. Second question, the poem uses symbolism to communicate a moral message. How does this use of symbolism make the poem relevant in modern society? Now, for this, you need to know that it is very easy for everybody to understand the division of human emotions as icy and fiery, and that makes it very relevant to everyone. So even though the poem was written maybe somewhere in the earlier 20th century, its meaning is still relevant and true. So what you can do for this answer, you can connect it to social issues, you can connect it to racism, you can connect it to discrimination, to nuclear war even, and elaborate on these points further, right? How you can connect these issues with what the poet mentions in the poem, right? And what is the root cause of all of these issues? It's probably these emotions in some way or the other. And finally, we have just few words of vocabulary. The first one is desire, which means want or wish. Favor, in this case, it means support. Perish, which means die. And suffice means to be sufficient, to be enough. If you found this helpful for your exam preparation, do like, share, and subscribe. And I'll end with what I always tell my students, that there is no substitute for preparation. I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye and take care.